You sabotaged the charity. My aunt said it into the microphone at Harbor House Community Center. 54 volunteers, donors, and neighborhood partners were seated in folding chairs beneath paper banners made by children from the after-school program. Behind my aunt, a projector showed a photograph of our mobile pantry van surrounded by families holding grocery bags. Beside that photograph was a red notice from the county grant office: payment pending corrective action. My Aunt Vivian told the room that the notice existed because I had refused to finish the quarterly report. She did not mention that I had written the grant for free. She did not mention the 400 unpaid hours I had spent building its budget, reporting calendar, and restricted fund ledger. She did not mention the expense I had refused to certify. I sat in the second row with my hands folded over an empty notebook, while people I knew turned to study my face. Vivian said the next reimbursement might not arrive in time to buy food for the following month. Then she asked everyone to remember who had stood with the charity and who had abandoned it. I could have answered with the credit card statement saved on my phone. I could have read my emails aloud. Instead, I told the board chair that I would discuss grant records only through the formal review. Vivian smiled as if my restraint proved her story. 11 days later, the grant compliance auditor shared one expense on the boardroom screen. The ledger described it as volunteer resilience training. The vendor invoice described 3 spa packages, 2 massages, 1 facial, a private relaxation suite, and gratuity. No class had occurred. No program volunteer had attended. The auditor did not ask whether I had harmed Harbor House. She asked why a private spa day had been charged to a restricted nutrition grant. I was 40 that year, with almost 13 years in grant administration. My paid job was with a regional housing organization that had no connection to Harbor House. I helped program directors turn good intentions into budgets, milestones, documentation rules, and reports a funder could verify. Most people thought grant writing ended when an award letter arrived. That was when the harder promise began. A grant application said what an organization intended to do. A grant ledger showed whether it had kept that promise. My aunt founded Harbor House 9 years earlier in the former recreation building of a closed church. The center ran a weekday homework room, a Saturday pantry, and a small emergency cupboard for families between paychecks. Vivian was gifted at making people feel that their help mattered immediately. She could turn a grocery store manager's polite 5-minute meeting into a monthly produce donation. She remembered every volunteer's birthday and every child's favorite snack. When a freezer failed during a heat wave, she found a replacement before the ice around the chicken had softened. The work was real. So was the trust she had earned. That made it difficult to explain the problem with Vivian to anyone who had only seen her at the center. She treated rules as useful when they protected her mission and petty when they limited her choices. If a receipt was missing, she called the purchase obvious. If a board vote was late, she called the outcome inevitable. If someone asked for a second signature, she asked why they did not trust her after everything she had built. For years, those shortcuts had been covered by small, unrestricted donations and volunteers who knew one another. Then Harbor House became large enough to compete for public money. The county announced a federal pass-through grant for food access and after-school nutrition. The award could fund mobile pantry deliveries, healthy snacks, insulated storage, translation, and part-time site staff in underserved neighborhoods. Harbor House had the families, volunteers, and community partnerships to use it well. It did not have anyone who could write the application. Vivian called me on a Thursday evening in January. "I need my brilliant niece for one heroic weekend," she said. The application was due in 23 days. Harbor House had not registered in the county portal. Its program numbers were scattered across 3 spreadsheets. The draft budget contained one line labeled "Community Support" for nearly half the requested amount. I told Vivian that a competitive application would take more than a weekend. "Name your price," she said. Then she laughed because we both knew she expected the price to be 0. Harbor House could not afford my professional rate, and I did not want payment taken from food or staffing. I offered a limited volunteer arrangement instead. I would write the application outside my paid work hours and without using my employer's equipment. If Harbor House won, I would help build the reporting system and train the person who maintained it. I would not hold the charity card, approve purchases, control its bank account, or certify reports for the executive director. Those limits went into a 2-page roll letter. Henry, the board chair, read it during a video meeting. "This is more formal than most of our paid contracts," Vivian said. "That is because the grant will be more formal than most of your donations," I replied. Henry signed the letter. Vivian added her name after drawing a small heart beside it. For the next 3 weeks, I worked at my dining table after dinner. I reconciled pantry counts, mapped delivery stops, calculated cost per household, and separated activities the grant could support from activities it could not. Vivian supplied stories about families. I removed every detail that could identify a child. Program volunteers counted attendance. I checked the totals against sign-in sheets. Henry obtained board approval for the proposed budget. We requested $146,000 for a 12-month project called Harbor Roots. The largest category was food purchased for pantry deliveries and after-school snacks. Other approved lines covered insulated containers, van mileage, translation, 2 part-time site coordinators, and a modest share of financial administration. There was no general wellness allowance. There was no executive retreat. There was no flexible category called community support. The application explained each cost and connected it to a measurable service. I submitted my final narrative to Vivian and Henry 3 days before the deadline. Vivian, as executive director, reviewed the complete package and submitted it through the county portal. 4 months later, she called while I was walking through a supermarket parking lot. She was crying so hard that I thought someone had died. "We got it," she said. "Allison, we got every dollar." I sat in my car and cried with her. The award meant Harbor House could add 2 pantry routes and serve fresh food after school 4 days each week. It meant site coordinators would be paid for work they had been doing as volunteers. It meant fewer families would have to choose between groceries and a utility bill. That joy was also why I noticed the first dangerous sentence Vivian said at the celebration. She raised a paper cup of sparkling cider and told the board, "We finally have room to breathe." The grant had given the program room to serve. It had not given Vivian room to spend. The county agreement incorporated federal cost standards and required Harbor House to keep source documents for every reimbursement request. Costs had to be necessary for the project, assigned to the correct category, and supported by records showing what the charity had actually purchased. The county would reimburse eligible expenses after Harbor House reported them. That meant the charity first spent its own cash, then requested repayment from the grant. An unsupported charge could delay the next reimbursement even if every other program expense was legitimate. I explained that at the first implementation meeting. Vivian tapped the thick award agreement with one fingernail. "Nobody is going to read all of this every time we buy apples," she said. "They do not need to. We need a system that answers the agreement for us." I built a restricted fund ledger with a code for each approved budget line. Every entry required a date, vendor, amount, purpose, funding source, approver, and link to the original invoice or receipt. I also made a 1-page purchasing guide. Green expenses matched the approved budget and still needed documentation. Yellow expenses required review before purchase because their connection to the project was uncertain. Red expenses belonged outside the grant. Vivian held up the guide during staff training. "Allison made us a traffic light because she thinks I speed," she said. Everyone laughed, including me. For the first 6 weeks, the system worked. The site coordinators photographed grocery receipts and uploaded them before leaving the store parking lot. The pantry manager attached delivery logs to mileage reports. The after-school lead matched snack purchases to attendance totals without being asked twice. I reviewed the ledger each Sunday evening and sent a short exception list to Vivian and Henry. Most exceptions were ordinary. One receipt showed sales tax the charity could have avoided. One invoice lacked the service date. One mileage entry used the wrong route total. Each problem was corrected before a report included it. The first argument involved flowers. Vivian bought 6 large centerpieces for a donor luncheon and entered them under nutrition outreach. She said the luncheon had raised unrestricted money for pantry fuel. I agreed that the event supported Harbor House. I also explained that decorative flowers were not an approved cost of the Restricted Nutrition Project. "It is all the same mission," she said. "It is not the same funding source." She asked whether I wanted her to return flowers that were already wilting. I moved the charge to the charity's unrestricted event account and documented the correction. No money was lost, no report was delayed. Vivian signed the correction after telling Henry that I enjoyed making simple things complicated. 2 weeks later, she forwarded an email from Juniper Falls Wellness Resort. The resort was offering nonprofit leaders a weekday discount on spa packages and private lounge rentals. Vivian added one sentence above the advertisement. "Could staff resilience fit under volunteer training?" I answered that the approved grant included no spa services or general staff retreat. Training costs would need a direct project purpose, an agenda, eligible participants, reasonable pricing, and any approval required by the award. I suggested free trauma-informed volunteer training offered by the county health department instead. Vivian did not reply. The question seemed finished. By the middle of autumn, Harbor Roots was exceeding its service goals. The 2 new pantry stops had served almost 300 households. After-school attendance was higher than projected. Food waste was lower because the coordinators adjusted orders every week. I began training Maribel, the office assistant, to maintain the grant files. She was careful, curious, and comfortable telling me when an instruction did not make sense. Vivian interrupted our second session to introduce me to a donor touring the building. "This is Allison, our entire grant department," she said. "I am a temporary volunteer advisor," I corrected. Vivian waved one hand. "She always says that. She is family. She is not going anywhere." The donor smiled as if Vivian had complimented me. I smiled too, but I repeated my role in the meeting notes that evening. My agreement ended after the first 2 quarterly reports and a documented handoff. Family had been the reason I donated my time. It was not permission to own that time forever. The first quarterly reimbursement went through with 2 routine questions. The county reviewer asked for a delivery log and an explanation of a mileage calculation. We supplied both within a day. The payment arrived the following week. Vivian treated that smooth result as evidence that the rules were less serious than I claimed. I treated it as evidence that organized records saved everyone time. Our difference remained invisible while the documents were complete. It became impossible to ignore during the second report. The reporting period closed on a Friday. I exported the restricted ledger on Saturday morning and began matching each line to the approved budget and source file. Food purchases appeared under food. Mileage appeared under transportation. Translation invoices listed the materials and languages provided. Near the bottom was a charge for $2,460. The vendor field read, Juniper Falls. The description read, Volunteer Resilience Training. The funding code assigned the entire amount to after-school program support. The source document link opened a 1-page credit card statement. It showed only the vendor, date, and total. There was no itemized invoice, training agenda, attendance record, or explanation of what the resort had provided. I stared at the line long enough for my coffee to cool. Then I opened my old email and found Vivian's question about spa packages. My answer was still beneath it. No spa services or general staff retreat were included in the approved grant. I did not assume the charge proved what had happened. A vendor name could be incomplete. A resort could host a legitimate training. A bookkeeper could select the wrong code. The ledger proved only how the charge had been recorded. It did not prove what Vivian had purchased. I sent her and Henry a neutral exception note. Please provide the original itemized invoice, agenda, participant list, and evidence of program purpose for the Juniper Falls charge. Until reviewed, remove this amount from the grant reimbursement schedule and place it in suspense. Vivian called 11 minutes later. Why did you copy Henry? He is the board chair and one of the designated grant reviewers. You could have asked me first. I asked both responsible officials through the same record. It was a leadership session. Then send the invoice and session records. She exhaled loudly. The card statement is the receipt. It shows that Harbor House paid Juniper Falls. It does not show what Harbor House bought. I am telling you what we bought. The grant requires source support. My opinion cannot replace it, and neither can yours. Vivian became quiet. Then she used the voice she had used when I was a teenager, and she wanted me to feel childish. Allison, do you understand what happens if you hold up this report? That is why I asked you to remove the line while we review it. The other eligible costs can still be submitted. We already spent the money. From which account? The operating account, like every reimbursement. Then the charge can stay in suspense until you establish whether another proper funding source exists. There is no other source. That answer told me why she was resisting the correction. Harbor House did not have much unrestricted cash left after replacing the van's transmission. If the grant did not reimburse the spa charge, the charity would absorb it. That was inconvenient. It did not make the charge eligible. Send the itemized invoice, I said. We need facts before we decide anything else. You know exactly what it was. I know the vendor. I do not know the purchase. It was for the people keeping this place alive. Who attended? Vivian did not answer. Send the records, I repeated. She ended the call. Henry replied to my email that afternoon. He said Vivian had described the charge as a volunteer appreciation and retention event. He asked whether the board could approve it after the fact. I explained that board approval did not rewrite the grant agreement. Harbor House could support volunteers with unrestricted money if the expense served a proper charitable purpose and followed its own policies. That was separate from claiming the purchase under a restricted public award. I also reminded him that we still lacked an itemized invoice. Henry answered with 2 words. Understood. Proceed. For 3 days, no invoice appeared. Maribel told me Vivian had instructed her to rename the card statement as training support and upload it again. I told Maribel not to alter or delete anything. I saved both versions of the file history and added a note explaining why the evidence remained incomplete. On Tuesday night, Vivian emailed a 1-page memorandum on Harbor House letterhead. It described a leadership resilience session for essential program personnel. The memorandum was dated the same day as the Juniper Falls charge. The document properties showed it had been created 18 minutes before Vivian sent it to me. That did not prove the session had not occurred. It proved the memorandum was not a contemporaneous record. The signature line was blank. No instructor, curriculum, start time, or participant was identified. I answered with the same request for the vendor invoice and original session records. Vivian copied the entire board on her reply. She said my standard exceeded the county's instructions and endangered the reimbursement schedule. Then she asked Henry to authorize submission without my approval. Henry called me the next morning. Can you certify the rest of it? He asked. My role does not include executive certification. I can finalize the expense schedule if the unsupported line is removed. Vivian says you certified the first report. I prepared it and signed the internal review box. Vivian made the portal certification as executive director. I sent him the first report, my role letter, and the portal confirmation showing Vivian's name. There was silence at the other end of the call. I should have known that, he said. The system should make it easy for you to know. That is why roles need to stay separate. Henry asked me to send a final report version excluding Juniper Falls. I did so before noon. The cover note listed the disputed line, the missing documents, and the reason it was excluded. I thought the issue was contained. 2 days later, I received an automated notice from the county portal. Harbor House had submitted its second quarterly reimbursement request. The requested total included $2,460 more than my final schedule. Vivian had restored the Juniper Falls line. She had authority to submit the report. She did not have my internal approval. I emailed Henry immediately and asked him to preserve the submitted version. I also recorded that the filed schedule differed from the version I had reviewed. I did not contact the county behind the board's back. I did not cancel the submission because I had no authority to do that. I documented my limit and waited for the formal process. The county's grant compliance reviewer selected 5 transactions for a routine desk review. 4 source files were complete. The 5th was Juniper Falls. The reviewer requested the itemized invoice, program purpose, attendee roles, agenda, and proof that the cost fit the approved budget. Vivian forwarded the request to me with a single line: "Fix this today." I replied that the missing records had never been provided to me and could not be created by changing a description. I attached my exception trail and copied Henry. By the following afternoon, the county had placed the next reimbursement on temporary hold pending a corrected report and adequate source support. The grant was not canceled. The county did not close Harbor House or take money from its bank account. It paused the next payment until the charity addressed the questioned cost and its reporting controls. The hold still mattered. Harbor House had already spent money on eligible food, wages, mileage, and supplies. Without reimbursement, its operating balance would tighten before the next pantry order. Vivian called an emergency board meeting that evening. I joined by video because my role letter required me to support reporting questions through the handoff period. Vivian began by saying I had abandoned the filing during a family disagreement. I shared my screen and displayed the final schedule I had delivered before the deadline. Then I displayed the submitted schedule with the disputed charge restored. "This is not a family disagreement," I said. "It is an unsupported expense in a restricted reimbursement request." Vivian leaned toward her camera. "You are making one wellness session sound like a scandal." "I have not called it a scandal. I have asked for the original invoice." "The county would never have stopped payment if you had helped me answer them." "A truthful answer requires the document they requested." Henry asked Vivian whether she had obtained the invoice. She said the resort's billing manager was away. I asked whether anyone had called the resort's general accounting office. Vivian said she would not discuss vendor communication with a volunteer who had become hostile. The other board members remained quiet. They were accustomed to Vivian filling silence until it sounded like agreement. Then Henry asked me what the quickest compliance solution was. I gave him 4 steps. Remove the Juniper Falls expense from the reimbursement request. Repay the restricted project account from a lawful, unrestricted source if grant money had already covered it. Provide the county with the original invoice and a written corrective plan. Use a temporary board-approved reserve to protect food service while the payment hold was resolved. "So we punish children over one staff day," Vivian said. "No, we protect their program while correcting an expense that should never be placed on them." The board voted to use up to $12,000 from an unrestricted operating reserve for food and wages. It did not vote to remove the charge. Henry said he wanted to see the invoice first. That was reasonable. It was also the first time anyone besides me had insisted on seeing it. The next morning, Vivian announced a public donor and volunteer briefing for Saturday. Her message said Harbor House faced an urgent grant interruption and needed community unity. I was not listed as a speaker. Henry asked me to attend because technical questions might arise. I told him I would answer questions about the reporting process without disclosing confidential grant files or personal information. Vivian called my mother before the meeting. My mother called me at work and asked why I was trying to ruin the only thing Vivian had ever built for herself. "Did she tell you what the expense purchased?" I asked. "She said it was staff care. She works herself sick for those families." "Did she show you the invoice?" "Why are you obsessed with a piece of paper?" That question followed me through the rest of the day. To my mother, the paper was an insult to Vivian's sacrifice. To the county, it was the source record for public money. To me, it was the difference between supporting a story and verifying a cost. Saturday morning, I entered Harbor House through the pantry door. Volunteers were packing rice and canned tomatoes into family boxes. The ordinary work made the conflict feel obscene. No one in that room had caused the payment hold. No family waiting for groceries should lose food because adults wanted an easier explanation. I helped tape boxes until Henry asked me to join the briefing. The chairs faced a small platform in the activity hall. Children's paper vegetables hung from blue string above the audience. Vivian had placed the county notice on the screen without the paragraph describing the questioned transaction and corrective requirements. She opened by celebrating Harbor House's growth. Then she explained that the county had delayed reimbursement after a member of her own family refused to complete essential reporting work. She did not say my name at first. She did not need to. People looked toward me before she pointed. Allison wrote the grant, and we thanked her, Vivian said. But when we needed her most, she chose control over compassion. Henry shifted in his chair beside the platform. Vivian lifted the microphone closer. You sabotaged the charity. The sentence landed in a room where Vivian controlled the screen, the microphone, and the order of speakers. One donor whispered that families should not manage family money. A volunteer near the aisle asked whether the after-school meals would stop. Vivian said she was fighting to prevent that outcome. Then she looked at me as if waiting for anger. I stood but did not approach the platform. I did not control the county's review or payment decision, I said. I declined to approve one expense because its required source document was missing. Vivian interrupted. There she goes, hiding behind paperwork. The board has my written record and the county's request. I will answer the board and reviewer through the formal process. Someone asked me to name the expense. I said I would not disclose a disputed grant record before the board had completed its review. Someone else asked whether Vivian had taken money. I have made no such claim, I said. The current question is whether one reported cost is supported and eligible under this grant. My answer disappointed everyone who wanted a villain before lunch. It also gave Vivian nothing she could call a public attack. Henry ended the discussion and told the room the board would issue a written update after meeting with the county reviewer. Vivian thanked the audience for standing with Harbor House. Nobody thanked me. I left through the side door while volunteers carried pantry boxes toward the van I had helped the grant fund. Vivian came to my house that evening. She arrived without calling and stood on my porch holding a white folder against her coat. I considered speaking through the door. Then I turned on the porch light, opened it, and stayed inside the threshold. I brought what you wanted, she said. Inside the folder was the memorandum she had created on Tuesday. This version included a typed agenda with 3 topics: stress management, volunteer retention, and leadership renewal. It also included a blank attendance sheet with spaces for 12 names. Where is the vendor invoice? I asked. They are sending it. This is enough to explain the purpose. Who led the session? It was peer facilitated. Who attended? That is why I need you. We can reconstruct the list from calendars. I held the attendance page by one corner. Were 12 program volunteers at Juniper Falls? Vivian looked past me into my hallway. Not 12. The template has 12 lines. How many attended? 3 of us represented leadership. Who were the other 2? People who have supported me through everything. Were they Harbor House employees, board members, or project volunteers? They are donors. Did they perform grant work during the session? Her expression hardened. Do you hear yourself? You are cross-examining your aunt over a day of recovery. I am asking whether this document accurately describes the expense. It can if you help me finish it. I placed the pages back into the folder. I will not sign a reconstructed attendance record for an event I did not attend. You do not have to say you attended. Sign as grant coordinator. I did not coordinate or observe this event. My signature would imply a review I cannot perform. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I saw the aunt who had taught me to drive and mailed me grocery money during my first year after college. Then she said, "If meals stop, you will live with that." The sentence found the exact place where my certainty hurt. I had spent years teaching organizations that compliance protected beneficiaries. Now, a real pantry order depended on cash that the county had paused. Removing one cost was simple on paper. Correcting trust inside a small charity was not. "The board has a reserve," I said. "The program can continue while this is corrected." "That reserve is for emergencies." "This is an emergency created by the submitted report." Vivian pulled the folder from my hand. "For you, being right has always mattered more than helping." She walked back to her car before I could answer. After she left, I sat on the bottom stair and questioned every decision I had made. I wondered whether I should have called Henry privately instead of copying him on the first request. I wondered whether moving the expense quietly to unrestricted funds would have protected the program with less damage. Then I asked the harder question. Which unrestricted funds? Harbor House had not authorized the spa day from a donor account or board reserve. Changing the label would not create money or approval that had never existed. Silence would only transfer the cost to people who had not chosen it. I opened my laptop and wrote a formal handoff memo. It listed the approved budget, the original ledger entry, each document request, the versions received, and the limits of what each record established. I wrote that the ledger showed coding, not intent. I wrote that the late memorandum showed Vivian's explanation, not independent proof that training occurred. I wrote that the vendor invoice remained necessary to identify the actual services. I also described Vivian's request that I sign the reconstructed attendance sheet. I did not describe her tears, her tone, or our family history. Those details mattered to me. They did not answer the grant question. At the end, I resigned from all approval and reporting support effective after a secure transfer of the existing files. I offered one final meeting with the board and county reviewer so the program would not lose institutional knowledge. Then I sent the memo to the full board. Henry called the next morning. He sounded older than he had 2 days earlier. "Vivian says you refused corrected documentation," he said. "I refused to sign a blank attendance record. The board can compare both statements during the review." "Will you still come Thursday?" "Yes, I will bring the grant files and answer only what the records support." The board meeting took place in the small conference room behind the pantry. Vivian sat at one end of the table, Henry sat at the other. The county grant compliance auditor joined on a secure video connection. An independent accountant retained by the board that morning sat beside Henry. I placed an encrypted drive and a printed index in front of him. The auditor began by narrowing the issue. The award remained active. The current reimbursement was temporarily held while Harbor House corrected a questioned cost and demonstrated stronger review controls. She said the process was not a criminal finding and did not establish anyone's intent. It examined whether reported costs met the award's conditions and were supported by adequate records. That distinction drained some of the theater from the room. Vivian could no longer argue that I had accused her of a crime. I had not. The auditor opened the approved project budget first. She highlighted food, transportation, translation, site coordination, insulated storage, and financial administration. Then she opened the restricted ledger. Juniper Falls appeared under after-school program support with the description, Volunteer Resilience Training. "This tells us how Harbor House classified the cost," she said. "It does not tell us what the vendor supplied." She opened the credit card statement. "This confirms the merchant and total. It is not itemized source support." Then she opened a document I had never seen. The county had requested it directly through Harbor House's authorized board contact after the resort billing office answered Henry's call. The Juniper Falls invoice filled the screen. It listed 3 signature reset packages. It listed 2 deep tissue massages, 1 sea mineral facial, a private relaxation suite, refreshments, and gratuity. The invoice named no instructor, course, meeting room, or educational service. The service notes described 3 adult guests. Henry asked whether the guest names matched employees or volunteers. Vivian said 2 were longtime supporters. The auditor asked whether they held documented roles in harbor routes. Vivian said they advised her informally. "Where is that work described in the approved project?" the auditor asked. Vivian pointed to the phrase, volunteer support, in the narrative. The auditor read the full paragraph. It described background checks, food handling instruction, route orientation, and scheduling materials for pantry volunteers. It did not describe personal spa services for executive leadership or donors. "Caregivers need care," Vivian said. "You cannot run a humane program while treating people like machines." "That may support a future policy discussion," the auditor replied. "It does not make this invoice allowable under this award and approved budget." Vivian said the day had helped her avoid burnout. The auditor did not dispute that possibility. She returned to the question the grant could answer. Was this cost necessary, allocable to harbor routes, authorized within the award, and adequately documented as a program expense? The invoice and approved budget did not support that conclusion. The entire amount was questioned. The auditor then opened my email trail. My first exception note predated the submitted report. My final schedule had excluded the charge. The portal version had restored it without my review mark. "The volunteer coordinator did not initiate this hold," the auditor said. "Our office selected the transaction and requested its support." Nobody spoke. The projector fan was the loudest sound in the room. Henry looked at Vivian. "You told the volunteers Allison refused to finish the report." "She refused to help me protect it." "She gave us a finished report without this cost." Vivian folded her arms. "After everything I have done, you are letting one receipt define me." Henry shook his head. "One receipt is defining one reimbursement decision. Your response is defining the governance problem." That was the moment the room changed. Until then, the board had been deciding whether my caution was excessive. Now it was deciding why a correct schedule had been altered and why incomplete records had been presented as training support. The auditor gave Harbor House a corrective path. The charity had to remove the cost, document repayment to the project, submit a corrected schedule, and adopt stronger separation between purchasing, coding, review, and certification. The board also had to explain how future source records would be obtained before expenses entered a reimbursement request. If the county accepted those steps, the temporary payment hold could be lifted. The board voted before leaving the room. Vivian lost authority to use the charity card or certify grant reports. She remained in a limited program role while the board reviewed her executive position. She repaid $2,460 from her personal account the following morning. The independent accountant corrected the ledger, reconciled the restricted account, and built a 2-step approval process for every future purchase. He also found complete support for the other costs in that reimbursement request. The board submitted its revised report and corrective plan within 5 business days. During the hold, the approved reserve paid for food and site wages. No pantry route or after-school meal was canceled. 19 days after the first notice, the county released the eligible reimbursement. Henry issued a correction to the same donors and volunteers who had attended Vivian's briefing. He wrote that I had delivered a complete schedule excluding an unsupported cost, and that the county had independently selected the transaction for review. He did not publish the spa invoice or name Vivian's guests. The public accusation was corrected without turning private records into entertainment. I completed one secure handoff with the accountant and removed my access to the grant folders. Vivian did not apologize. For months, she told relatives that I had chosen procedure over family. She was partly right. I had chosen a promise made to families over a favor demanded by one relative. Harbor House continued serving the neighborhood under tighter board supervision. I continued caring about its work from a distance. A grant is a promise with a ledger. Changing a code cannot change what was purchased. A good mission cannot turn private comfort into a public program cost. Sometimes protecting a charity means refusing the line that makes its report easier. I did not sabotage Harbor House when I refused to certify that expense. I stopped its most convenient story from replacing the truth.